So we will go ahead and get started since it's right at 12. My name is Angie Marcus, and I work here with Cobb County Water System. And we do monthly lunch and learns the last Friday of the month, 12 to 12:45. Every day, bring a lunch, learn a little bit about a variety of topics. So we have got Rob Trawick today, who is the Cobb County, all I know is the ag agent.
Ag natural resource.
Ag natural resource agent here in Cobb County. So they work around the corner at the extension office, and he's going to be presenting on landscaping in Georgia and what that means for us and a good way to do that. So I'll turn it over to Rob, and we'll also, there's restrooms and water fountain, Coke machine out there if you need it. Feel free to get up and walk away. If you have a question, feel free to just ask a question. And online, if you're joining us online, type it in the chat box. I will be monitoring the chat box. And please just make sure you keep yourself muted. If you want to unmute yourself to ask something, nobody's monitoring the chat box, but I'll be back there monitoring it. So I'll turn it over to Rob, and we'll go ahead and get started.
All right. Thank you. Thank you, Angie. I appreciate that. So, again, my name's Rob Trawick. I'm the A&R agent, like she said, here with the University of Georgia, Cobb County Extension. My background is actually in ornamental horticulture, landscape design, and arboriculture. So I do a lot with trees, shrubs, a lot of ornamental plants, things like that. And one thing because this is the water lab, we're talking about conserving water, making landscapes as maintenance free as possible. Decided to do a program on water-wise landscaping for your Georgia garden. Because everyone knows the price of water can be exorbitant, particularly in the summer. It can, you don't want to be out there always having to do all that. So, there's a term, if you want to, write it down or Google it. It's called xeriscaping, xeriscaping. Sounds like it's a Z, but it's actually an X. But xeriscaping is a type of landscaping. It was really developed out in the west part of the United States. I think particularly Colorado back many years, several decades ago, about planting and planting a landscape that can be native or is not going to require a great deal of water input, because particularly out west we're getting those water restrictions. But even here in Georgia, it can affect us. I don't know if you've ever noticed, there's the water wars going on between Georgia, Alabama, and Florida all the time, complaining about how much Atlanta takes off of the Chattahoochee River. And so, there can be water restrictions further down the line that can affect us. And as you know, a landscape is not something you just throw together and just, rip out and do all like that. So it's good to go ahead and plan for the future on these. But I'm going to talk a little bit, I'm going to go through a list of some plants that I like, that I find are very drought tolerant, that can do well once they're established in the landscape. And also talk a little bit about best ways to design, and also some methods of, proper planting, making sure the plant is put in, planted correctly, so that you get the most out of that plant. So there are really 6 steps. There's 7, but I kind of narrowed it down to 6 steps to, have a water-wise landscape. And that is proper planting and design, soil analysis and improvements. We do soil analysis all the time over at the Cobb Extension office. Appropriate plant selection, efficient irrigation, use of mulches. Mulches can be a real big, help as far as conserving moisture in the landscape, and then appropriate maintenance to go into these landscapes. So as far as proper planting and design is concerned, when you're designing a water-wise landscape, you want to group plants based on their water needs. So there, I use basically 3 zones in this. One is a high water need zone. The other one's a moderate water need zone. And then there's a low watering need zone. And the reason you want to do this is because obviously they're going to have different needs when it comes to that. You're going to have irrigation out there. You don't want a plant that requires more moisture and hooked up with a plant that requires very little to none, other than just your annual rainfall, you can end up with some situations there where if you're overwatering certain plants, you can get root rot, you can get other diseases that can cause a lot of problems. So ideally, not more than 10% of the landscape should be zoned for high water use. I think that's just common sense to a great extent. 30% or less of an area should be zoned for moderate water use, while that remaining 60% should be, designed and set aside for low water use plants. Let's see. There we go. Going into soil analysis and improvements, there's a lot of work we can do on our soils. One of the best things to do right off the bat is before you plant a landscape is get soil tests done. We do, like I said, soil tests over at the extension office. They're $9 per test. Oftentimes you can break your yard up into several different areas, a front yard, a backyard, a side yard, a turf area, things like this. And knowing that when you get a soil test result back, it'll tell you basically what your phosphorus, potassium, calcium, magnesium, zinc, and pH. There's calcium, calcium. I mentioned calcium. So, so those are really important things to know, particularly in my opinion, the pH. The pH of the soil is extremely crucial. The reason the pH is so important is basically what happens with nutrients. If the pH is out of whack, let's say it's too high, which is too alkaline, or too low, too acidic, you can have all the nutrients in the world in that soil, but if the pH is out of whack, it'll be completely unavailable to the plant. So I liken that tantamount to starving to death in the middle of a grocery store. If you go to the grocery store, you don't have your debit card, you're not going to eat food there. Well, if your pH is out of whack, the plant can be in there, but all those nutrients can be there, but they're completely unavailable. So that's a really good thing to check on that, so you can alter that, play with that pH. And as far as phosphorus and potassium are concerned, obviously a bag of fertilizer will have 3 numbers. Nitrogen is the first number. Phosphorus is that second number, and potassium is the third number, so N, P, and K. The phosphorus, in particular, sticks around forever in the soil. So if an area has been fertilized over and over and over again with something like a triple 13 fertilizer or a triple 10, that phosphorus can build up in the soil. So you want to start changing your fertilizer rates based on, I need something with a 0 in the middle if my phosphorus levels are really high, or potassium is really high. I need to sit there and account for that. One thing I do get questions on all the time is nitrogen. Nitrogen is not tested in a soil test. It's because nitrogen is so mobile in the soil, unlike phosphorus. Nitrogen basically just washes right out of the soil. So nitrogen is available to the plant to pick up right then and there, and then it's basically gone. So testing for it would be worthless. Yes, ma'am.
I guess you get those little bags where you bring in your soil. Does it tell you how deep you do? Or
yeah, we have a brochure with it. The bags don't say that, but what you can do is really what you want to do is not get all of the soil in one place. You want to, let's say, just for example, a front yard. Okay, you're going to want to take 8 or 10 small samples going down. Think about where the roots are. The roots, that's how deep you want to go down, 3-4 inches. Get down in there and then take multiple small samples. I usually go out there with one of those Home Depot buckets, and I'll sit there and throw those 8 or 10 samples in. I'll mix them all up. Like I said, we do have the bags at the office, but what I always tell people to do is bring it in a Ziploc bag and label with a Sharpie the Ziploc bag if you have, a front yard and a backyard you're doing, and then you can transfer that into the bags at the office. One thing with the soil test is you want to make sure the soil is dried, a little bit dry, because if it's those bags we use are paper. So a paper bag, wet soil, they don't exactly get along very well. So that's something you definitely want to, let that soil dry out a little bit before you bring it in. Any other questions? Okay. So as far as during landscape construction, there are certain things you want to do. One is you want to slope the beds away from the buildings. You don't want, rainwater going up and hitting a foundation or anything like that. You want to introduce gentle swales to add interest, and it's helpful to retain soil moisture. You want to plant moisture-loving plants at low elevations and plant your drought-tolerant plants at a little bit higher elevation. So, and then getting into appropriate plant selection. So the adaptability of the plant to the site in which it has to be grown should be an important consideration when selecting plants. So consider the following: sun exposure, light intensity, typical windy conditions, average summer and winter temperatures, and drainage patterns. Sun exposure, in my opinion, is probably one of the most important things on here, because a western exposure or a southwestern exposure is completely different than a north and an east exposure. If you just middle of summer, go out and step on the west side of your house when that sun's going down, it's probably a 25-degree difference between right there. And if you went around to the northeast side of your house, you can have a huge difference in there, because morning sun and afternoon sun are completely different animals. I mean, just completely different. So, you want to plant, you're planting based on that, plants that can tolerate that really hard afternoon sun. You want to sit there and make sure you put those, in that type of area. Regardless of whether a plant is native to the area or is an exotic import, if it is adapted to the soil, the climate, and the local conditions, it generally should thrive, should have no problems with it. So, and I'll talk a little bit about, proper planting. That's going to be a huge part that you look into. As far as when we dig a hole, I had a professor at Auburn that used to beat this into my head. He would sit there and say, don't put a $50 plant in a 5-cent hole. It's better to do the opposite. So, when you dig a hole, you always want the top of that root ball to be level with the existing grade. I usually actually lift it up just a little bit higher than the existing grade. If you plant a plant too deeply and, put native soil right on top of that root ball, is a surefire way to watch it sit back and die. It will not survive very long. You typically want to dig a hole that's about 1.5 to 2 times as wide as the root ball. And then if you ever take a plant out of a container, when you take it out of a container, you oftentimes will notice those roots are circling. It gets what's called root bound. If you want to get in there, I use a shovel. I've used hatchets. I've used knives to go in there and just shred the outside of those roots. Because if you put it in the hole without doing that, what's going to end up happening is that those roots are going to continue to circle and circle and circle, and they'll never branch out and really get into the outer soil where it'll be able to really thrive. So pay particular attention to how you're planting. Do a good job of it, and the plant should work out very well for you. Once you fill all that soil back around there, tamp it in. You water it in immediately. You can get rid of those air pockets, because believe it or not, roots will not grow through air. And then you just, from there, you just add supplemental, irrigation to that until it gets itself well established. Plants generally that are adapted to these sites, that are well established, shouldn't take a whole lot of supplemental irrigation.
Can I ask you a question? Once if you're the root ball, should you put mulch? Put mulch around it, but not on it. No,
you can. The question is, when you put mulch down there, and I'm going to talk about mulch in a second. But when you put that mulch down, you can put it right over that root ball, just not the native soil. You don't ever want to put native soil back on top of that root ball, the top of that root ball. And I'll talk about the depths of mulch here in a second too, when I get to that. So, okay, efficient irrigation. So efficient irrigation usually results from a carefully and appropriately designed irrigation system. The irrigation system should be designed according to the water needs of plants. And this is why we're getting back into that grouping of plants, why we group plants with similar water needs together. So that all goes into the design portion of that. You want to make sure like I said, you have those all grouped together. Never install an irrigation system before the landscape design is created. A well-designed irrigation system results in very efficient water use and less water waste. Also, particularly on your larger trees and shrubs, consider using drip irrigation to water these trees, shrubs, and flowers. It uses 30 to 50% less water than an overhead sprinkler system. And it's also, when you're using those impact sprinklers above the ground, you get a lot of water that's lost to evapotranspiration. So that's always something that's, to keep in mind. Another nice thing about using a drip irrigation system is you're not constantly wetting the foliage. When you constantly wet foliage, you can end up with a lot of disease issues. So it's much more efficient. It just, in my opinion, just works a whole lot better with the drip systems. Mulches. Now getting into mulches. Mulches are essential. They aid in the retention of water. They minimize evaporation lost from the soil. They help prevent weeds that compete with the plant for moisture. They also add organic matter that are beneficial to the microorganisms that are in the soil. It moderates the soil temperature. It helps prevent erosion. And it can serve as a barrier to certain soil-borne plant diseases. So, and when there's a ton of different things that can be used as a mulch. Typically what I see most used in this area is either pine straw or, the pine bark mini nuggets, kind of a mulch like that. The big thing with using the ground up mulch, like the pine barks, is don't put it more than 2 to 3 inches deep. And don't have it all up against the trunk of a tree or anything like that, or the trunk of a plant or the stem of a plant. The reason for that is what'll end up happening is if you ever bought a plant from, say, Pike Nursery, or you bought one at Home Depot or Lowe's, what those plants are actually growing in is what's called a soilless media. That soilless media is generally comprised of pine bark, peat moss, maybe some sand in there. So these roots will grow in that particular type of material. Well, what ends up happening is if you put the mulch out there too deeply, the roots will start growing into the mulch instead of growing deeper into the side, into the soil. So, you think about that. I was down at LSU for several years. We went through a really bad drought down there. And one thing they pride themselves on the LSU campus for is their live oaks. They have beautiful live oaks all over campus, and the tops started dying out of some of them. And the reason was they just kept piling mulch on top, on top, on top. All the roots of these trees were growing into that mulch. And when we go through a drought, boom, it's like there's very little soil moisture in there, or at least that's the first stuff that dries out is the top. Just makes sense, right? So, and another thing about our organic material, like pine bark, like peat moss, any kind of organic material, when it dries out, it becomes extremely hydrophobic or water-fearing. If you've ever tried to wet a bale of peat moss, you know what I'm talking about. You put water on it, it looks like it's just water rolling off a duck's back. So once it's moist, it has a tendency to stay moist. But, in a situation like that, talking about the depth of mulch, you really want to avoid like I said, having that go up in there, and then, that's the first stuff that dries out, and then it's extremely hard to get it re-wet. Mulches, like I said, also prevent erosion and serve as a barrier. I already went over that, I guess, barriers certain soil-borne diseases. But again, keep in mind the depth of mulch you put down. As far as pine straw is concerned, I think it works very, very well. Typically, I use pine straw, particularly in areas that have a slope. If you put the small ground up pine bark on a hill, we get a gully washer, you're going to watch all that mulch, kind of slide down the hill with the water. So as far as appropriate maintenance is concerned, so a xeriscape as a low maintenance landscape requires less water, less fertilizer, less frequent irrigation. It requires less routine pruning generally. depending on the type of pruning being done, but it can require less routine pruning. And if a healthier plant is going to require fewer pesticides, whether that be insecticides or fungicides. I look at it like this. Plants are a lot like people. If you're run down, you're not doing well, you feel bad, you're much more apt to pick up that cold virus or some other disease. Your body's much more susceptible to that. Plants are very much kind of the same way. A weak plant is going to be the first one insects attack, or the first one a plant pathogen, a disease is going to attack. They attack the weak ones first. If they build up in big enough population, they'll start attacking healthy plants. But generally, they're always going to attack those weak plants first. So doing this correctly, again, you can use fewer pesticides, whether they be fungicides or insecticides.
Is there any truth that the pines affect the pH of the soil too much?
It can over time. It can help over time acidify the soil. But let me just put it this way. Changing the pH of a soil oftentimes is like tantamount to putting a man on the moon. Because soils, particularly the more heavy clay a soil is, the more it resists a change in pH, or what's referred to as buffering. It has a high buffering capacity. So it takes a long time for it to begin to acidify that soil a little bit. Pine trees in general are an acid-loving species. They like that 5.5, or so pH. So generally, they're already growing to some extent in an acid soil where you have like native pine straw falling. But like I said, if it does, we're talking 40 years plus before it really makes a big change into the pH. Now, that kind of goes over a lot of that. Now I wanted to go over really some trees and shrubs or plants that, mostly shrubs that I like, that I find that are, do very well here. Some of them are native. Some of them, I would say, have their green card. They've just been here a really long time and they've just adapted to the site. Like azaleas, for example, are native to Japan and the Far East. But they've been here for so long, it's like they do very well here. They're adapted to this climate very, very similarly, because Japan actually has a very similar climate to the southeastern United States. So, all right, so I'm going to go over some deciduous and evergreen shrubs. Deciduous shrubs, again, these are the ones that drop their leaves in the fall. A deciduous tree drops all of its leaves in the fall. Evergreens, again, evergreen year round. Evergreens typically, if they're going to drop leaves, they're going to do it in the spring when a new flush of growth comes on. So a good deciduous shrub, and I'll talk about oak leaf hydrangea a little bit more when we get in there, but oak leaf hydrangea is a really nice deciduous shrub. Scientific name is Hydrangea quercifolia. So really nice plant there. Evergreen shrubs, just an example, inkberry, Ilex glabra. That's, the typical evergreen shrub. So I'm going to go through, I've broken them kind of into 3 different categories: small, medium, and large. Small being 2 to 5 feet tall. Your medium are 5 to 8 feet tall or so. And then your large can get 8 feet and taller. Okay. Small shrubs. So this is a really good one. This is a native. This is the dwarf Yopon holly, Ilex vomitoria. Gotta love that specific epithet, vomitoria. The reason it has that name is because Indians, this is a native, Indians used this plant as their native syrup of Ipcac, so to speak. If they got throbbing stomach, they would drink a concoction made from this plant. It would cause them to throw up. So that's why it's got that lovely name. But there's dwarf Yopon is a very good native plant, very drought tolerant, does very, very well here. The compacta holly, Ilex crenata, is a Japanese holly. You can break your hollies into your Chinese hollies or Japanese hollies. Chinese hollies are the ones that have the little stickers on that poke you. Your Japanese hollies are entire, have a leaf very similar probably to a boxwood, something like that. May have little tiny serrations on them, but no stickers. The nice thing about this guy, if you're familiar with boxwoods, Boxwoods, I've gotten away from even recommending the guys because there's two really bad diseases that we deal with, particularly one called boxwood blight that's just wiping them out left and right now. I've already had 3 calls just today from people sending me pictures asking if they had boxwood blight. So I've started telling people avoid boxwoods. If you want that kind of formal look, this Ilex crenata compacta does very well as a boxwood substitute. So don't plant a problem in your yard. The Yopon holly back here can also be used in that same type of formal hedging if you want to do that. This is a Chinese holly. It's the Carissa holly. It's Ilex cornuta Carissa. It's Carissa. I'm mentioning it, but I'm mentioning it as a cautionary tale because this one, it is a sport of Ilex rotunda. Is the rotunda holly another Chinese? This is rotunda right here. I'm sure all of y'all have seen rotunda before, the rotunda holly, all those stickers. This guy, like I said, it came from rotunda. Whenever you plant this, it always seems like eventually over time, they turn into rotunda. You'll end up with a plant that's half rotunda, half Carissa. So just as a little cautionary tale, but that's one to keep in mind to maybe possibly avoid. Japanese barberry, which is Berberis thunbergi. Barberries, as a definition, are tough, extremely tough plants. They can handle drought, you name it, whatever you can throw at it, these guys will take it. So really good plant. There are a lot of different varieties out there. This one in particular I really like because of that red foliage, but again, it does have the little stickers on it, so it will stick you. Winter jasmine is a really nice vine. You get these nice yellow flowers. It's extremely drought tolerant, does very, very well in our climate. So one to keep in mind, maybe just put down on your little note there. Junipers, once they're established, can be extremely hardy. This is Parsons juniper. I'll go through another one. There's another one I mentioned here later on down the line, later in the presentation. But Parsons juniper is a really good, tough plant once they get established. It does need full sun, though. They have to be in full sun. And just in case you're curious, never go in and really hard prune any kind of juniper, no matter what they are, because they will not push that growth back out. A Japanese plum yew. This is Cephalotaxis. It's one you can use both sun and shade. This guy does really well in the shade. And again, once it gets established, really, really good plant to have in the landscape. You'll see these around all over Atlanta. Pyracantha or firethorn. This guy is in the rose family. I've seen people, they espalier these things. I'll put them on the side and kind of train them up against a brick wall, things like that. And in the summer, they get those little red berries. So they're a nice plant. Again, and once they get established, very, very tough. Shrub roses. If you're thinking about growing roses, I'll be honest, the rose family is the largest botanical family there is. In case you didn't know, peaches, plums, apples, nectarines, pears, not kumquats, mayhaws, those are actually all in the rose family. So the one thing to keep in mind about anything in the rose family, though, is they have a lot of disease issues, can have a lot of disease problems. But the shrub rose, these new guys right here, some people refer to them as, there's a variety out there called knockout roses. Knockout roses are kind of our shrub rose. They tend to have a lot less problem with disease than like our hybrid tea roses and other things like that. So it's a really good plant. It can be very drought tolerant once it gets established. I know a lot of people, they come in multiple colors. You can find these in pink, red, yellow, you name it. Pittosporum. The Japanese Pittosporum is a nice plant. It's you'll see this in a couple of different varieties. One will have a lot more white on the leaf itself. But again, once the pittosporums get established, you see these around Florida all the time. They're all over Florida. I think Disney must have planted 1 billion of these. But they do very, very well. Good hardy plant.
Do they kind of grow round like that?
They can grow, yeah. A lot of times it's people just shape them like that, but they typically have more
I think I
shape.
had 3 of those that didn't make it from that 6 degree.
But like I said, it's a good possibility. These aren't the most cold tolerant
I
species.
mean,
Think
the
about fall.
leaves never came out. I just kept hoping.
Yeah. I'll tell you that weather we had back in December when we got down to like 7 degrees. Really whacked a lot of plants. I've gotten more phone calls based on that. And then the one that really whacked us was we had a fairly warm February by February standards go. And then what happened the first week of March, boom, we go down to 24, 23 degrees, and all that new growth that was coming out gets completely whacked by that. So I had in my yard, I had a tea olive, an osmanthus. I'm going to mention tea olive here in a minute, that had just started to recover in February from that 7 degree, temperature. And the next thing I know, it had to start back all over again after that March freeze. Distilium is a really nice plant. It's been around a while. If you're familiar with loropetalums, this is in the same family as a loropetalum. So does very well. It's a good plant. Again, once established, they do very, very well. And now our azaleas, evergreen azaleas. Like I said, these guys can really fall into a bunch of different categories. We have like the gumpos that really get to stay very low to the ground. Then you get to your, larger varieties like your indicas, carooms. They're really nice plants. They hit that flowering spot right around the beginning of April. If you know the Masters Golf Tournament, they literally time that golf tournament for when all the azaleas there are blooming. So it's these are nice once established. They do fairly well. But main thing with these is you're generally going to want to plant these in some filtered sun, where you got a little bit more shade. I wouldn't put these on any kind of western exposure because it will cook them. But they can be really nice. They do like kind of that acidic pH, like a 5.5 to 6 pH is where it's its nice little happy spot. So those, and like I said, these guys again they're native to Japan, China, those kind of areas, the Far East. And like I said, I think this one has probably earned its green card by this point. Summer sweet clethra, which is Clethra alnifolia. Again, one of the smaller shrubs, has the nice little spikes, flowers. It's a good plant as well. All right, so moving on into our medium shrubs. These are the 5 to 8 foot tall guys. So one that I really like is Fothergilla. Fothergilla, once established, does very, very well. It'll have these little flower spikes in the spring. Very nice plant. There are some new varieties that are always coming out. Also, I think there's one that's got kind of a burgundy foliage to it as well. Trying to remember a grower named Don Shadow put that one out. It's like Shadows. It's got the name Shadow and the name that has a really nice color to it. Forsythia, this is one you see blooming at the beginning of spring. Very tough plant. The thing that always sticks in my mind about Forsythia is when you see Forsythia blooming, that's when crabgrass is popping up. That's when this blooms at the same time crabgrass is germinating. So keep that in mind. If you want to put a pre-emergent out for crabgrass, you want to do it before these guys bloom. But again, these nice yellow spikes of flowers. The rest of the year, it's a green shrub. Does very well in this area. Really likes this area, and you can't go wrong with this.
Is that a full sun kind of thing, or
what's that?
Is that a full sun?
Yeah, full sun. You can put these out in the middle of full sun, western sun, and they'll do very, very well. Japanese Clara is this is, if you're familiar with red tip petunias, we used to have like these, people call them red tips. Those are completely out of the nursery industry now. You couldn't find one to save your life. They're still out there in the landscape some places, but you won't ever find one. This is kind of our red tip substitute. The reason the red tip petunias basically got wiped out is because there's a fungal disease called Entomosporium leaf spot that they get, and it causes the whole plant pretty much to defoliate over time. So this is the one that has kind of taken its place. Again, Japanese Clayera. The reason it's Clayera and it has a scientific name, Turnstromia gymnanthera, is because for a long time they thought this was a plant called, Clayera japonica. But turned out they misidentified this thing many years ago. But everybody in the industry still calls it Clayera from its, wrongly given name. But it has nice, I was hoping this had a little laser pointer, but you can see on here, you can see that new red growth, kind of bronzish red growth. And there are some varieties out there that are really nice that do very, very well. They are kind of brittle though. I wouldn't put it next to a bike path or anywhere like that, because if someone falls into it, the branches will all break. Glossy Abelia. Abelia X grandiflora, you'll see these all over the place. This is probably holds the record for the longest flowering time of any plant that's out there. These will bloom basically from early spring all the way through till fall. And they put a multitude of these little bell-shaped flowers on there. So really nice plant. You can put them in, the more sun they're in, the more flowers they'll produce. American beautyberry is Calicarpa americana. They produce these nice little bunches of like the purple berries right there. There is a variety you can kind of see up in that upper right-hand corner that actually produces white fruit, so the purplish, or fuchsia colored. But these do really, really well. They can handle kind of soggy areas. That can handle a little bit of wet feet. But also at the same time, as like I said, they can, once they're established, they can handle pretty much anything you throw at them. Loropetalum, again, Loropetalum chinense. It has, I think everybody's familiar with these guys. You see them all over Atlanta. They're in just about every cookie cutter landscape on earth. In the spring, they put out these nice little frilly white flowers. It's in the witch hazel family. So it has a very similar flower shape, those frilly flowers shape, very similar to witch hazel. And these are purple. They come in a wide variety of varieties. There's actually one, I know Crimson Fire, Purple Diamond, or some medium, kind of shorter, medium-sized shrubs. There's actually even one called Purple Pixie that only gets probably about 4 inches above the ground. So it can be a very small one too. And then you have varieties like Ruby that get very, very tall and almost turn into a tree. But in full sun, they'll generally have very burgundy colored foliage. If you get them more in shade, that burgundy color starts to fade away and gets a little bit of green in it. But the more sun you get, the more flowers, and they do very, very well. Again, going back to oak leaf hydrangea, I've started with that one at the beginning. It is a deciduous shrub. The nice thing I like about these guys, again, when you get in there, it has that really nice exfoliating bark. So it gives you something to look at during the winter as well as the summer, because the bark kind of peels off and it has like a cinnamon color on there. And then it produces these big flower spikes. They're already out there blooming now. So they're already out there pushing out their flowers. And they do very, very well.
Is that native?
Hmm?
That's native?
I believe so, yes. So very good plant. And there's different varieties of it too. I know there's one called Jet that doesn't get as tall. Trying to think of some of the other varieties that are out there, but there's multiple varieties that have some different flower spikes on there. Dwarf Burford holly. This is actually one that was native here to an extent. I say native This one was actually found here in Atlanta at Oakland Cemetery downtown, not this particular plant, but this species, because there is a Burford holly that's out there that has a little bit bigger leaves, but this is a Chinese holly. It does have the little one point at the tip of the leaf, and it does very, very well. It can handle pretty much anything. It'll also put out little berries in the fall, so really nice plant. Dwarf Akuba or Akuba japonica. There are different varieties of it. There's one called Gold Spot that has one big yellow, spot in there. Then there's Gold Dust Akuba that has kind of, you can see it like there, almost like a gold dusting I'm trying to think of the name. Just a gold dusting that's on there. Variegation. That's what I was looking for. Variegation that you find on this. Shade only. Don't ever put these in sun. They have a neat little fruit. It has a little fruit that looks like a coffee bean. If you see these enough, you'll think Juan Valdez is going to be walking around picking the fruit off of it like he's collecting coffee. But these have to be in shade. If they're in sun, the leaves will get scorched. They are susceptible to wet feet or poor drainage, so you want to make sure that this guy is in a very well-drained area. All right, so we're going to work now into our large shrubs, 8 feet or taller. So viburnums, in my opinion, are one of the more underutilized plants that's out there. There's a lot of different varieties, like there's snowball viburnums that are out there. This is arrowwood, has a really nice flowers, opposite leaves, really, really good shrub. Once it's established, once it's sitting there, it does pretty well. Butterfly bush, full sun. If you want to see butterflies in your yard, this is unbelievable as far as butterflies, bringing them into a friend of mine says it's like crack cocaine for a butterfly. They just absolutely hit this guy. Has these nice little flower spikes on there, and then there are some shorter and taller varieties. But Buddleia is a nice one to have around if you like to attract wildlife, things like that. Sweet shrub or Calycanthus floridus. Really nice little shrub here. Does very well in this area. Can handle some shade and will do really well in our climate. And once established, does very, very well. Japanese camellia. So camellias are kind of broken into 2 different types of camellias, mostly that we grow here in the South. One is the Camellia japonica, has a little bit larger leaves. The flowering time for that is you're looking at, some bloom in fall, some bloom in winter or early winter, midwinter, and late winter. So depending on the variety, you can have, you can almost time it out where you can plant different varieties and have flowers almost all the way through winter. So this is one of our, like I said, one of our winter flowering shrubs. It's really, really nice. Sasanqua camellia is the other one. It has a smaller leaf, a little more what they call stellate, a little more attenuated, longer leaf, but a smaller leaf. It mostly blooms almost always in fall, only in fall. So, but this is one to keep in mind. Both camellias like to have some of that filtered sun. Don't ever put one where you're going to be in afternoon sun, where it's getting afternoon sun. Morning sun is fine, afternoon shade. Want to make sure you do that with either camellia species. Burning bush, Euonymus alata. It's, like I said, this thing in the fall will have serious red color. It's really pretty color. It gets and be a nice big shrub. But it, like I said, it has that fall color that just knocks your eyes out. And once established, they do very, very well in our landscapes. Panicled hydrangea. Now, these guys are going to need to be in shade. I'm sorry, paniculata. These need to be in sun. These are sun-loving hydrangeas. I've got that wrong. So if you're familiar with limelight, limelight is a variety of paniculata hydrangea. The other varieties, I think there's one called vanilla strawberry vanilla or vanilla strawberry. That have some red color in them as well. So you don't just get stuck with kind of the green flowers, but they have kind of a pointed type flower, and they'll produce these flowers later in the summer. Another juniper, the Pfister juniper. These are the ones that get really big. Full sun, have to be in full sun. They can handle just about, any of that sun exposure as long as they're getting that full sun. They can handle afternoon sun. Very, very good plant. Tea olive. This is my guy that, like I said, got burned back pretty bad this winter. I've gotten a lot of calls from people about these, wondering if they were going to die, if they were going to come back. I think most of them are coming back. But again, that little cold snap we had in March kind of really knocked these guys back for a loop again. This is Osmanthus fortunei. There's also Osmanthus fragrans, but the flowers on these smell wonderful. I mean, they have just a beautiful smell. In the Old South, what they used to do in these plantations, if you go to some of these old plantation homes, you'll see that they have them planted right in front of the windows, because what they would do is during the summer, they would open up the windows and that fragrance would get pulled through the house. So it has, again, just a really nice fragrance. The fortunei here, Osmanthus, can be also called like a holly osmanthus. It can look like a holly, but hollies have alternating leaves, and this guy has opposite leaves. Native azaleas are, in my opinion, very underutilized. Really nice, like I said, whereas the azaleas most people are familiar with are native Japan, Far East, that area, these guys are actually native right here to our backyard. If you're familiar with Callaway Gardens actually was built as a sanctuary for, I believe, the Flamium. It's one of the orange-colored native azaleas. That's the whole reason they Mr. Callaway was a huge fan of native azaleas. But they are deciduous, so they drop their leaves in the fall. So they're not evergreen or keep them around year-round. But they have a flower that looks almost like a honeysuckle. When you think about the Lonicera, those honeysuckles, it has flowers very similar to that. And like I said, really wonderful plant, very underutilized, and you can find them in a lot of the garden centers around here. They do grow those, and they come in a multitude of colors as well. They kind of like that same soil type that the azaleas are imported azaleas which is that acidic 5.5, 6 right in there. That's the type of pH that they really like. Double file viburnum is another one, Viburnum plicatum tomentosum. It'll have these, really beautiful white flowers on there. Can get to be a really big shrub. So not one to plant in front of the window. Otherwise, unless you just don't want to see the window again. But they do very, very well. The bottle brush buckeye. This is the buckeye. You think of Ohio State Buckeyes. This is that buckeye, and it has these nice, almost like pipe cleaner looking flowers on there, and they produce that buckeye seed or the fruit. It's a really nice plant, has kind of a palmate veination as far as the foliage. You have a center, and then you have the leaves all come out along there. So really, really nice plant. Lilac chase tree or vitex. This guy, full sun, can handle just about anything you throw at it. It reminds me in some instances when you see it, you'll see oftentimes they almost look like a crepe myrtle out there. So, and I didn't mention crepe myrtle. Crepe myrtles are also a plant that are very drought tolerant, can handle a lot of things, but vitex does really, really well too. And it also is a butterfly attractant and things like that. Oleander, one thing to keep in mind about oleander, I've seen these grow in the Mojave Desert where nothing else will. They can pretty much handle, almost no watering, or they can handle it being in a swamp. They have, multiple flower colors. One thing to keep in mind about oleander, though, is they're extraordinarily poisonous. Don't go chewing on any of these branches, or that'll be the last time we see you. So But again, it's a neat plant, has nice flowers, and extraordinarily drought tolerant. All right. Any questions? Did we get any questions from?
Nope, none so far on the chat.
Oh, they're bored, huh?
Yeah.
So, these are some really great UGA extension publications. Can I borrow those?
And I will tell you too, and those online, that we do put recordings of these up on our YouTube channel. So we've got all of our lunch and learn. So this will be up probably sometime early next week. So in case you missed something, feel free to go back and watch it again. Get what you missed.
So thank you. And there are two that I brought here. There are two different publications. There's actually several that are on the website. If you go to extension.uga.edu/publications, type in the term xeriscaping. Obviously, I forgot my other parentheses there. But if you type in xeriscaping, the first two that's going to pull up is a publication about water-wise landscaping. It goes through those those different pieces I went through, those 6 steps. It adds the 7th, which is, a turf area and, minimal turf area. That's the first one that'll pull up. And the second one, which is this water-wise landscape guide for the Georgia Piedmont, is a really in-depth, great publication. Goes through the designing, and all of that. So definitely, check out the publications website. Again, extension.uga.edu/publications. There's a little search bar. You just type in, you can look up, vegetable gardening. You can look up, and all of our publications that you can get from Extension, the ones we print out like this, are all online in a PDF format. So they're easy to download. I always go to the little site and I'll right click on, the link. You can download them to your computer as a PDF. I keep little folders on my desktop that, and I'll put those in there for anything. I pull them up willy-nilly. So once you download them, you don't have to be connected to the internet to use them. And there's some really great publications that are out there that go in. The nice thing about, what we do at Extension with the University of Georgia is, our mission is to provide research-based information to the public. So the research that goes on campus at UGA is that information, research-based, is, all we disseminate. So there's no advertisements, any of this kind of stuff. That's what we're around for. That's what we're here to help y'all do. So if you have any questions, please don't hesitate to give us a call. We're ready to help y'all in any way, shape.
So go ahead. We do have a question.
Okay.
If I can figure out how to get to the question. Sun preference for tea olives.
Tea olives can handle full sun all the way back to partial shade. Great plant. No insect or disease problems really. It's a wonderful plant. You can use for just about pretty much any situation.
And there was another question, suggestion for alternative to grass on a shady slight slope under a large oak and other trees.
I would look at, one thing you can look at is possibly mondo grass. There's a dwarf mondo. Mondo is Ophiopogon japonicus. Ophiopogon is like the true monkey grass, the little thin-bladed monkey grass, not the liriope that has the thicker blade. That'll grow in dense shade. It'd be expensive because, and it doesn't grow very, very fast, and it won't handle traffic. So it's not something you want to, go play soccer or football on, but it can be used as a turf substitute.